want to welcome you to the session. I want to talk a little bit about my research at the Schulich School of Business, and I've also done some similar research in business around innovations in management education, preparing young people for the future and the challenges there. And so really what I'm going to do today is pretty much, let's call it a story. I'm going to start the story off with the underpinning, so the theoretical underpinning of the work that I've been doing. And the reason I invited my colleagues, and I actually could have invited another 10 of them, because the work that I do very much requires a collaboration of others at York University and outside. But I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to bring 4 grads from the Schulich School of Business who have been involved in my research in different ways over time. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about pedagogy, the underlying theory of how I teach and how it's making a difference. And then Steve Glassman is going to help me out on how we're innovating content in the role that he's been playing. And then I'm going to bring in 2 of my students and 2 of my past research assistants and 2 grads who are now working at IBM to talk about delivery, and they'll talk about the innovative things that we've been doing in the course and how partnerships outside of the school have a huge influence on what we're doing for the 21st century. But just for fun, before we begin, and in my class I have interactive technology. So, you know, over the past 10 years, what do you think has had the biggest influence? What's had the biggest influence on the changes that we've been seeing in the classroom? Past over 200 years, there we go. Anybody? What do you think? The Industrial Revolution, yeah, there we go. Anybody else want to, yeah? Huh? The printing press, there we go. Actually, and all of the answers, of course, are correct there, but what I found on the web was quite interesting. Guess what? The blackboard. And I just thought, how appropriate. The blackboard, and I remember my mom talking about writing on the little slate, you know, in her classroom. And this idea of going from individual learning to collective learning fascinates me. And this is why, and this is what gets me excited. And so in the past 5 to 10 years, what do you think is making the biggest difference in what we're doing? And there'd be many answers along that. And I'm going to, this is very sensitive, I'm going to just, you know, for me, I think the internet has had a huge influence. And this is a quote, you know, from John Chambers back in 1999. And before the dot-com boom and bust, this idea that the internet would change learning and the emergence of e-learning, et cetera. Now, it hasn't exactly happened that way, but, you know, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of energy in it. And there's absolutely no doubt that the internet is changing things. I do an invitation when we have the spring gala event on campus where I have potential students and their parents come into my classroom, and I do the oh yes, welcome, some of you may have attended that. And I do a session where I have interactive questions, and it's always interesting to me how the numbers are changing. So in this case, what's your perspective on 62% of them love it, right? I don't know about you, but I'm not in that range, versus in 2009, 28%. How would you rate your ability to use technology? 38% see themselves as experts. They're like 17, 18-year-olds that are seeing that, versus 2009, maybe 13% would identify themselves that way. Have you used technology extensively in a learning environment? 50% extensively, not just a little bit of technology, versus 28% in 2010. And then have you used a notebook, or are you planning to have a notebook or a laptop or, you know, some device in the fall? 80% now, and still 80% in 2010. That hasn't changed, the use of technology, the tablets, etc. What forces reshaping organizations do you think will have the biggest influence on your career? And again, here they go. 45% now are saying technology, whereas 26% in 2010. 2010 to 20, you know, where we are today, it's not a huge difference, is it? 3 to 4 years, and already the trends are shaping up. So Michael Bloom did a neat study from the Conference Board of Canada, basically talking about the Office of 2020 and the changes that we can imagine. He caught my imagination and started to get me to think, what should I be doing in my class, in my introductory business class, to help prepare young people going forward? And here are some of the things he said would happen. And this article was written a couple years ago. We can already see it happening. The office will be where we say it is. Social media will be the community halls. Absolutely. Teamwork will be a learned skill, not just a really nice attitude. So I play with my students in my first class, and I say, this is my office. I can see this. I love the beach. The Office of 2020, what does it look like for you? And how can we prepare for it? So the imperative for innovation, there was no choice. There is no choice when you have leading edge, top quality students coming into your classroom. You need to innovate. You need to be ahead of the learning curve. You need to be moving into areas that are pushing students and pulling them into new ways of thinking, which is really what we're trying to do. So here's where my research has been, over the past 15 years. Around the dynamic knowledge economy and how can we get there. This is what my class looks like today. There I am with my tablet. Students all have laptops. They're tuning into my slides in real time. They're answering questions. They're providing feedback as we go. And so my colleague, Dr. Gareth Morgan, this idea of a lecture out of the notes of the professor. This is what it was like when I was in university, out of the notes of the professor into the notes of the students without going through the heads of either. Right? You write the note on the blackboard. You talk to your friend, you write the note in your notes. You go home and you memorize it. So the idea that it's time for change, it has been for a long time. This is the essence of the work that I've been doing along with my colleagues. To move from instructor in control, me, putting the notes into your notes, to you, the student, interacting directly, creating knowledge together, sharing knowledge together, and moving ahead collaboratively. And one of the major findings in my work is this difference between hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills are like adding up a column of numbers. Soft skills are like leadership, management, teamwork, things that are a little bit more subjective. And so what I found is for hard skills, when you teach them, if there is a right way, you have to teach in an order. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. You can't do step 4 until you've done step 1. If there is a right way of doing things, hard skills, and teaching in that mode is great. Unfortunately, we teach a lot of material that way, even though there are other ways we should consider. So the soft skills, or this idea of self-organized learning, this is what I was developing in my dissertation, and how to create content or create learning experiences that enable people to go where they need to go, take ownership of their own learning, and develop the skills and the knowledges that they feel they need. Again, from the academic underpinning, as I say to you, to bring you to the theoretical underpinning of what I'm doing, is this learner in control, this engagement through open questions, hooks, conversation, etc. Some ideas, some of the first generation kind of things I use. There's a lot of surveys, right, that are first generation, where you do, first step financial statements for sure. And then for second generation, and I've actually developed some content and created a system with my colleague, Gareth Morgan, to take us into that second generation model. Which brings me to this second point around innovating content. So one of the major things I wanted to look at, how can we create short, small bites of material that people can pick up and learn, not only in the school place, but also even more importantly in the workplace. We've only got 5 or 10 minutes to learn. How can you write content and deliver content in ways that people can grab it, learn it, move on, go back and get it, to refer to it when they need it, in the future. And this is where my colleague Steve Glassman is going to help me out. So here's what it looks like. You can see my self-organizing model, all the titles of many of the things that we've written. Way too many for you to see, but how they interconnect, right? How the student can learn by going through bits and bytes and selecting what they choose depending on what they think they need to learn. We put it online over a period of 10 years, and the really neat story, again back to York University and how they support research, it's being commercialized. At this point, it's been picked up by VPRI, Vice President Research and Innovation, and a nice little startup in Waterloo, and this article, and yes, let's hope it sees worldwide distribution. But, I found with online learning, with digital content, that, what you can't see, you can't always value, right? So if it's invisible, it's like it is truly invisible. And this is where I started my work with Steve Glassman, MBA grad from the Schulich School of Business, on, so I have online content. How can you help me to do some blended, how can you help me do some, some work with what I have online to match it up with what we could have in a hard copy format to inform students about what we've got going on. Yes?
I'll make a few side trips to talk about books. I'm currently working at York University. I've come back as an employee and work in the bookstore, and also we have an in-house print shop and we do some publishing. In 1982, before Mr. Schulich gave his gift to the university and the school was renamed, I was a part-time student, and I bought a book in 1982. I bought this book. And the only reason that I know that for sure is there's a receipt inside. Because I can't recall, but there's a receipt. And there was no tax on books in 1982. Please, the provincial government still doesn't put taxes on books, but there's a federal tax. And it says York University Bookstore. I don't recall being there. I don't recall reading the book either.
It doesn't. It doesn't look like he did read the book, right?
But ask me any question about statistics, and I might be somewhere in the normal curve there. I'm $20.35. January 4th, 1982.
Wow.
I was an MBA student from 79 to 86. Had a full-time job and started a business as well. It happened to be a bookstore. And that's the book on the bottom of the slide. And it was a bestseller. Professor in Pennsylvania, I believe, wound up with quite a large estate. When I produced this graph in 2010, the book was out of print and Mansfield deceased, but a similar book with exactly the same title was selling at the York University bookstore for $183.95. And the blue shows that increase in price, 2 points makes a line, and the red or pink line is inflation. This is just a small problem, which I call a broken marketplace. There's something broken here. There are some bigger and more interesting problems that require innovation, like Professor Adams is delivering to a generation of students. But this is This is a big problem for parents that are financing students through school. I have 2 students, university. It's a big problem for students as well across North America. Double the rate of inflation to triple the rate of inflation for decades. Something's wrong. And Professor Adams, I attended one of her classes recently, this year. I remember being there. And she talked about a vicious cycle versus a virtuous cycle. And in publishing, the small problem is that as you increase prices, as the publishers increase prices, their argument is, well, it costs so much to put together a book, and we're selling less and less. And in fact, many students don't buy books and somehow muddle through university or fail. They don't succeed because of this little problem of cost. It needs to be fixed. Now, technology is a bigger problem for those of us that still think the Gutenberg invention is the invention and all we really need. But the digital is here, the internet is here. This is a graph, a couple of years old. You can imagine that the lines will continue and the trends will continue. It's of trade books, means general reading books that we could get at a bookstore if you could find one, or online. It's not textbooks, but it shows, I use this simply because it shows something, which is that things are changing. Things are changing, except for that university press line. That's the purple line, which is almost flat. No change over time. And it's similar slow rate of change in publishing for higher ed. Means they don't want to innovate, or they don't feel they have to. Now, what's happened, obviously, with a math book like statistics or economics is that the publishers started putting in CDs. And the CD would have great stuff, quizzes, sample problems you could solve. The CD might tell you that you've solved the problem incorrectly, try again. And online, there are brilliant things that are going on that are bundled in with the book. So there's some level of innovation that that the publishers are certainly providing to, I guess, the world, the universe of university students. And here's textbooks, which shows compared to something like Harlequin romances, the slow rate of change to digital. So we're seeing about 6%, 10%, we might be at 10% now of college textbooks are digital. Now, I shouldn't call this the bigger problem than the price problem, but the situation that I think textbooks are in, being a vital part of the university experience and learning, is that, as we've heard in education, there's a demand for change because of the change in the students and their expertise and their expectations and the way they require us to learn, us to deliver teaching so that they can learn. Publishers are starting to change, and the retail environment, as you know, is, I think, more than just a small tweaks, that there's real big disruptions there. I'm kind of in the middle as your campus bookseller, I think, of that intersection of everywhere we're demanding change. We need change, and the better solution is innovation than the alternate, which may be chaos or failure of our students to learn in higher ed. So, to our course of first-year students. You might not have gotten the full picture, but there are really exciting things that this first-year class does online, with the new mindsets online, with other tools that are available through the class. And therefore this book, becomes at most a little guidepost or map to the course, to jumping around. This book was 400 pages 6-7 years ago when I started working with Professor Adams. It's now 163, I'm sorry, 163 pages currently.
Shrinking every year.
And our revenue at the bookstore is shrinking too. The $80 includes the software packages and licenses that we buy from IBM and from another partner, so that the students really are paying, I think, about $20. Maybe we're close to my 1982 price for this. Yeah, I think it's about that. But here's an interesting little experiment that we did. About, 2010, I would say, we decided to make this an e-book instead of a print book. And we've continued that the students buy the e-book, the digital book. An e-book could be a simple PDF. In this case, it's a little more or maybe a lot more dynamic. Certainly my staff has learned quite a bit in order to, we've pushed to learn how to create something as a digital publication, not a print publication. How dynamic should it be in order to hyperlink to new mindsets or other sites, a government site to learn about how to calculate inflation of books and so on.
Students, what about the book, what about the technology? And in 2000, and all the years coming up to the 2010, they're saying, well, do we have to have a book? Do we have to carry a book? Can we have an e-book? And so finally in 2010, the numbers were, again, relating to the research, were big enough that I said to Steve, okay, we don't need a book. We just do an e-book, right? No physical book. And here's what happened. The world collapsed, didn't it? Yes. The students went into the bookstore, saying, where's the book? Professor Adams, there's no book. And I'm saying, it's an e-book, it's an e-pub. You see, what happened is a survey was done of the students at the end of the course, right? But 13 weeks prior, they were just high school students. And they didn't really know what an e-pub was. So again, it's a lesson that you learn, right? The research data that you get at the end of the course is going to be much different than what. So here's what Steve did for me.
Well, we did for the students as well.
Yeah.
Is we created the e-book, and it was effective for the roughly 500 students. But last minute, some of them said, I would actually like the print version. So this is a 2-hour conversation about what's better for me, for you, but more importantly for somebody that had a computer in their kindergarten class, which would be the class of 2012, I think, would be digital natives. I think that's the definition. And some of them wanted it printed, so they could print it. They could print the thing, but we offered to print it if they wanted to spend another $14. We would print it for them and bind it. And this is an example of the printed and bound book. And I would have thought that's great, and the three students would ask for it, but in that year, 16% of the 400 to 500 did. The next year, just a small sample, really, out of 500, 21%, and 12% this past September asked for, and we made sure that it was inconvenient, too. They asked for it. and then we would take their name and number and call them when it was printed. We didn't have them ready in advance for them because of copyright laws. There is copyrighted materials, there's short articles that they still are required to read some great things about farming implements. Yeah? Yeah. And so finally, my sort of view on publishing and this struggle that we have. The struggle is in part educational institutions, but also publishers are looking for a new business model because of the disruption of the internet, because truly, even in Canada, with this slow rate of change, some of our major publishers are closing their warehouses in Canada and saying we'll ship from Nebraska or Illinois. This has happened in the past year. The change is being forced on them, even if we're only at roughly the 10% level of offering a digital book versus a print book. And so there's the struggle. There's content, and then there's that CD that becomes something brilliant, or can be something brilliant, which is, in the case of Professor Adams' book, how do students interact with the knowledge in here? How do they work together? How do they interact with developing skills for research and so on and so forth, so that they can learn in their way and in a new way, and who knows, maybe in a more effective way, particularly for managers. So that's the middle really interesting space, which I call interaction. That's the interesting space that I think publishers will be vying to take over, as well as perhaps some new entrants, some venture capital or small groups will do a more effective job in the middle space. And content may become somewhat generic, and you've probably heard about free content. Nothing wrong with that, is there? A lot of content, like this book, is stuff that could have been written 20 years ago, and there could be online free materials. There was a student, I think about 2 years ago, that graduated from an Ivy League school in the States that did very well, apparently, and made the widely known claim that he or she, I think it was she, had not bought one book in her experience at that Ivy League school. So content is less important for the publisher and maybe even for the educator and the student than that middle piece of interacting. And I think that's where the innovation is, and that's where we see Jean's, Professor Adams' course going.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. We also found that, there we go. We also found that students don't read the print stuff. They'll read the online. So when I'd ask questions in class, they'd have answers to the online materials, but not the print. So it was, it's a combination. People have different learning styles. And thanks to Steve, because really this is the advantage of working at York University, where I can go out and I can find somebody. And it's not profit oriented. It's a not-for-profit bookstore. Now I want to talk to you about innovating delivery. I'm going to talk really fast through this, because really the innovating delivery is where I want my two colleagues, my IBM previous students, right, to chat to you a little bit about. So, and we've seen lots of changes from classroom to distance ed. I remember taking distance ed courses to what's now being called blended learning. And I emphasize the learning part, blended learning, not blended instruction, right? Blended instruction is what many calling it blended learning, but thinking about different ways of instructing. I'm interested in different ways of learning. Thus, I have the print book and the online, right? That's different ways of learning. And here, again, I've published on this. I've presented this in in workplace seminars as well as in the academic. And the whole idea of different ways of bringing together different ways of learning, collaborative learning, individual learning, learning in the classroom, learning outside the classroom, formal learning, informal learning, all of those things are my passion. I try to bring as many of them in different ways inside the classroom because as I mentioned at the beginning, students are changing. I don't have to tell you as parents, and I'm a grandma, my grandkids are different than my kids were. So I wanted to move from this old first generation, this step-by-step, this one right answer model where the expert controls, and it worked in the 60s and 50s, this compliance learning, right, this memorization. It doesn't work so well today because nothing's predictable. Tell me about it, right? And so this idea of empowering people to learn, ongoing learning, continuous learning, everything that we as managers and leaders in the workplace want. This is what I'm trying to instill in first year, 17, 18-year-olds, and they're actually really good at it. They just need the opportunity. And again, to the theory, this again is something I've published along with that chart, you know, the linear versus the non-linear, is this idea that if you're trying to have people, pardon me, remember things, this interactivity online between content and learner is very dynamic. But if you want them to you know, learn soft skills, they need to be applying it in a context, right? So a much more robust interactivity. I call it the soft skills learning triangle. And so here are some of the things that Steve alluded to that I'm doing in my classroom to kind of get this going. So I have, as I mentioned, you know, online system that puts stuff out to you in real time. You can submit back to me. I teach, the slides go out to the students. They can link from the slide to the online material. So if they haven't completely done the reading or they need a reminder, they can get it. I'm not trying to trick them. I'm trying to invite them. I want them to get the answer. I'm not trying to find stuff they don't know. So I always put in links where they can get the answer. So here's an example. I teach them, as we talked about, the vicious and virtuous loop. And then I gave them the example of the recent, right, 2008 stock market crash. Here's what some of them drew and gave back to me. You can imagine I have a large number of students. I get lots of stuff. I can teach quickly. Again, back to empowering. They give me the answers, right? This is not in the book. They have to think it out themselves. And then I can point out trust is one of the items I'd covered in another week. And so they brought this back in this week, right, which was quite interesting. And then I flipped it and said, okay, all right, you 17 and 18-year-olds, what are you going to do to have an influence on that? And here's, I get pictures, you know, I get written word, but here's where they're marching the bankers off to jail, right, to the big house. If that doesn't say it all, if that isn't memorable, what would be? Other ways that I use it. Here's an example of how they, over the period of the term, start putting together pictures and words, right? Quite neat. Outside the classroom, here come my colleagues. So another way that I try to open this up is to bring outside technologies in. And IBM is a tool. I welcome my two friends, Eric and Aleem, to come on up and tell us a little bit about this part of the experiment. So again, innovating delivery.
Well, thank you, Professor Adams. I think actually I'm going to use the keyboard. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background about our experiences and about who we are. Today we're going to kind of talk about how we went through Professor Adams' course in our first year at Schulich, and we eventually became research assistants with Professor Adams, and today, now we're at IBM. So this is Aleem and Huda, and my name is Eric Redinger. Both of us currently work at IBM in their consulting division. It's Global Business Services. Aleem works in the Strategy and Transformation division, and I work in Business Analytics and Optimization. But interestingly enough, despite the fact that we're colleagues now, it kind of goes, we've been colleagues for quite a long time, and it goes back quite a far way. So both of us were actually in the same class out of, I think it was probably 300 to 400 students that came in the door in 2009, Schulich, for undergraduate. And we took Professor Adams' Management 1000 class. Both of us, I guess, for one reason or another, stood out to Professor Adams, and she made us research assistants from the second, third, and fourth years, which we then became team leaders for different aspects, which we'll talk about a bit. And today at IBM, we still keep involved with Professor Adams' research, and we do our best to try to bridge the gap between IBM's involvement with the students and with Professor Adams' research. So, with that said, we wanted to start off just briefly mentioning a little bit about our experience as actual students in the class. So, I can say from firsthand experience, having taken Professor Adams' class, it's largely different than what I would say most classes are like, even from the very beginning. I would say Professor Adams has a couple of different focuses on the way that she teaches that is very enlightening as a student. So, for instance, in terms of team involvement and in terms of big projects, you can see up there's 2 major projects that students participate in and kind of work on throughout the semester for different purposes. So there's the BPTP, which is a business plan team project, where students are grouped in the beginning of the year and they work on essentially a business concept, almost like as if it's a startup company. And throughout the year, they kind of develop that idea and they present it in front of their peers and in front of a panel at the very end of the year. And I think if I'm correct, actually, in our year, one of the groups ended up going on to win a competition across Canada with their idea, and I think they received Startup Venture for that. There's also this concept of the Personal Competence Development Plan, and it's basically this whole idea of online learning that's self-guided rather than taught to you through dogma, and you kind of lead the learning that you want to learn that is based on where your weaknesses are. You take out a survey in the beginning of the course, and you pretty much find out what areas you personally would benefit the most from working on, and kind of create it into an enlarged plan. So some other concepts that Professor Adams uses. She has a lot of what I would say is very innovative technology, especially at the time. So these concepts of new mindsets, open book, kind of ideas. Today there's a lot of courses that provide that online, like there's MOOCs, right? There's Coursera, there's edX, but when we started university in our undergraduate time, there wasn't actually any of these available. So I would say Professor Adams was very innovative in that regard. Also, she used a lot of different types of technologies. So students often had their first kind of exposure to ideas like Dropbox or Google Docs for different types of team communication and team file sharing, which you use a lot later in your career, and you use it a lot outside of the curricular environment. But it was the first opportunity for students to really get their feet wet.
So this year we have a Twitter. I can't believe it, they got me on Twitter. And we also had a lecture on social media with a social media, like, you know, I haven't done that before either. So again, feedback from students along the way.
Okay, so one final thing I'd mention also is that Professor Adams brings in a lot of guest speakers, so students get a chance to try to develop their networking skills from a very early point in time. So as an example, we had a fellow named Sean Sarega, who's the CEO of Mr. Franchise Inc., which is a local entrepreneurial company. And she brought in different types of guests like him throughout the year for students to interact with and get in touch with and develop their skills that way. So actually, Aleem, I think, is going to start off with the RA experience.
Hello, everybody. So I guess I'm now going to be talking about the RA experience. So both me and Eric, as mentioned earlier, we both had different roles as RAs. So for me, I was originally part of the tutorial support for students. And in my last 2 years, in my third and fourth year, I was a team lead for lecture support. And so essentially during lecture support, we had a team of approximately 15 to 30 RAs that would come in, and they'd be actually taking field notes, observing the learning patterns of students, and we would actually use this research to help facilitate Gene Adams' research. And it was just interesting over the years how things have changed. So I know that when I was actually first in management 1000 in first year in 2009, we were actually using these HP tablets, and students were able to write and draw messages, as you saw earlier. And a lot of you might be wondering, okay, great, but this was back in 2009, and to put it in perspective, the iPad came out in 2010. So this was very early on, cutting-edge technology that we're actually using in the classroom to learn. I guess Eric will now be talking about his, activities as a research assistant.
So just briefly, while Aleem covered tutorial and lecture support, I was in charge of ad hoc and e-portfolio research. So On one hand, I helped with any students that wanted to, that needed help with technical troubleshooting. So for instance, the interactive software that students use during class, if they had issues with the Mac compatibility or that regard, I helped with that. But I think I actually didn't have to do too much because as Professor Adams demonstrated, most of the students within the first week or two either already knew how to use the technology or immediately adapted to it. And we found actually over the years that like the rate of adoption increased dramatically. So whereas in a first year as RAs, I think probably it took 3 weeks, I would say, to really get students going. And then by the final year, it was within the week that students already all, like 100% were acclimated to technology.
And this year, I mean, the RAs had nothing to do. The students had figured it all out and were telling us what to do. It's amazing, the rapid change.
Can I ask a question here? I haven't heard any mention of a medium like Moodle being used.
Yeah, we use Moodle. It's a foundation. These are the others that I use on top of it.
Yeah, actually, I could quickly talk about that. Actually, it ties into my second point. So the other component I did as a research assistant for Professor Adams was e-portfolio research. So we tried to see on and online kind of communicative methods, which one could be the most effective and how could we try to develop students' experiences and exposures to communicative technology. So Moodle is definitely one of them. We actually tried a number of different approaches. We tried one called Mahara. Not all of them succeeded. In our case,
a lot of
Mahara
them didn't, but that one definitely didn't.
But for instance, one of them that we did find had some benefit was actually IBM Smart Cloud Engage. It's a software that we use now with our work at IBM, and a lot of companies actually do use it. It's one of the main tools we implement at companies. So students got a first-hand experience on actually using real business technology. So that was kind of neat.
Great. So in terms of our key findings that we actually had over the 3 years that we were research assistants, of course, students are obviously becoming a lot more tech savvy. Students were now teaching us about how to use various technologies. Different students were actually coming up with their own guides and teaching others. So instead of actually ad hoc support helping students out, other students would help other students. So everyone, I guess, became their own opinion leaders, so to speak. But the second finding that we had is that students are actually becoming more and more interested about technology and how it's being used and applied in business environments. So, as Eric alluded to earlier, when students first came to Management 1000, they were only familiar with technologies that they had already heard about, right? So Dropbox, using Facebook inbox messaging tools and whatnot. But they were not actually familiar with tools that businesses use today. And so I guess this is where IBM Smart Cloud Engage came in. And so this is a tool that's actually being used in Management 1000, and students are encouraged to use this tool in their business plan team project, where they have to work in a team of 4 to 5 or 6 students to come up with a business idea. And so this year was actually the first year that we introduced Smart Cloud Engage certificates. So it was a partnership, I guess. IBM facilitated as well as the Schulich School of Business to offer these types of certificates for students. And I guess students were very much interested. We had a great turnout of students that actually had applied to obtain these certificates. So I think that really highlights that students are really trying to learn these new technologies and try to highlight them to show, hey, look, I actually not only know how to use tools that are consumer friendly, but I'm actually now learning tools that are used in the corporate world today.
And actually that idea came from one of my research assistants this year in week 4 of the course, and the IBM people came through. We tried it out, figuring, that's not going to go anywhere. Who needs a certificate? A letter signed by the VP at IBM. Who cares? It was a huge success. 60 teams out of 80 applied for a first level. I think 30 out of 80 applied for a second level, which was above and beyond. And then we had 8 people that went to the top level that are now going to be working with IBM, and on a focus group basis. It was beyond belief a huge success. I would never have dreamed it. But again, from my research assistants this year, then working with fellows who had graduated from my course and used the tool, we could then put together, what do they need to do? How does it work in this environment?
So I guess in tying all of this in, applying learning in the classroom to the workforce today. So this is, I guess, the application point of the presentation. But so one of Management 1000's core messages to embrace change brought on through leading technological tools and processes. And so this principle is actually mirrored at many firms today. And of course, I'm going to talk about my experience at IBM. So at IBM, we believe that we're a very innovative company. There's many, I guess, different ways that you can measure how innovative a company is. People can argue Apple's innovative, Google's a very innovative company, Microsoft is innovative. But the way I measure a company's innovativeness is by the number of patents that they produced on a year-to-year basis. And so for the 21st consecutive year, IBM is not only the top firm in the US for the number of patents, but also the top firm worldwide. So that's pretty unique. The second is a flexible work environment. So, I'm sure all of you saw the slide earlier with a gentleman with a laptop in his hand on the beach. And basically that's trying to demonstrate that, we are able to now work pretty much anywhere and everywhere. And I think that's really highlighted at IBM. As consultants, there's many different places that you can work. So people often ask me, so Aleem, where do you work? Which office, or what exactly do you do? And I say, well, it depends. I can work at an IBM office, I can work at a client office, or I can work from home. And they think, wow, that's pretty unique. And I think that really highlights, this whole entire concept of the Office of 2020 and how IBM is actually implementing a lot of these principles today and has been. And the last one is optimized performance. So the idea that IBM is a company that, as a consultancy firm, we actually go into different of our client sites and actually help them improve their performance. So for example, Eric is part of the business analytics and optimization division. And in that practice, it's essentially using data that companies already have to solve business problems that they may or may not even know about. And this isn't just IBM, and this is something I want to really highlight. Most companies are actually doing these things already, but we just wanted to highlight IBM as an example. And this is just a concept of Office 2014. So these are things that IBM and many companies are already doing today. So you can just imagine what things might look like in Office 2020.
So kind of some concluding thoughts. So we wanted to highlight that actually what Professor Adams mentioned at the very beginning of her presentation with this Office of 2020, we actually can give examples of things that we do today that actually meet all of those Office 2020 criteria. So, for instance, work 24/7. Today, we get as IBM employees, we get our email on our phone, and we get what's called Same Time on our phone. It's essentially like an MSN type of tool where you can communicate instantly and see the status and progress of 500,000 employees that all work for IBM across the globe. Today, we now have what's almost called desk on demand. We aren't assigned a cubicle anymore. Today at IBM, we were given a laptop, and essentially our laptop is our workstation. And I know this is mirrored at other firms too, at many other consultancy and technology firms. So for instance, from anyone that's...
And they graduate, what, 2011?
We graduated in 2013. We're very...
Yeah, 1 year ago. There we go. They
we're
graduated in 2013. I'm sorry.
So, we were assigned
That's
laptops.
1 year ago.
Yeah, 1 year ago.
I know, and we were teaching this 4 years ago, even longer than that, actually 10 years ago, but yeah, quite neat.
So
it came true.
It came true.
What I say after they graduate, they say, you know what you said to us, it came true. It came true, and so that helps the new students coming in saying, oh yeah, well what she's doing is kind of weird and radical, but you know what, it's coming true.
Yeah, I mean as students who were introduced to the concept of being able to learn online and not having to necessarily use a textbook, it ties into the way it actually is in the real world. So we work everywhere now, and we get our emails everywhere. We can access information everywhere. So that's kind of cool. And then Aleem's gonna talk about some other tools.
Yeah,
Great.
We should wrap.
Yeah, we're gonna try to wrap this up. But there's many different types of tools that we use at IBM. So we have tools that are used to access. We have something called Professional Marketplace, used to access opportunities and clients that we can work at. Eric alluded to Lotus Same Time, which we use as an instant communication tool. But I guess what I really want to highlight is the flat organization concept that Gene Adams always alludes to. And that's the concept that, it's very easy to talk to your higher ups or your management team. So I know for me, it's very easy for me to connect and have coffee meetings with people who are not one level above me, not 2 levels, but even 3 levels above me. So it's very easy, it's as easy as sending an email or sending a ping to, via Same Time. Hey, would you like to meet for coffee? Hey, would you like to grab lunch? With people that are in a senior position. And I guess that little picture over there is Minority Report. I'm not sure how many of you have actually seen the movie Minority Report, but to me, whenever I think about technology, I always think about the movie Minority Report and just how, different things could be and how they can look like in the future.
So just, essentially we just wanted to wrap up by saying that we found the course very beneficial, and we think that it's very, not just essential, but it's necessary for students to really be given a hands-on opportunity to use technology right from the start with education. And we thank Professor Adams for giving us that opportunity. All
right, there you go. I mean, a paid political announcement, I had no idea where they would be going with that. But just to wrap up, I want to say, the reason I have the colleagues with me, right, and I honestly didn't know, thank you very much, but it's not the reason that I brought them here, is just to emphasize the importance of collaboration in research, right? Like, you think the professor in the class or the professor or the researcher is doing all the work, and I'm just saying to you, unless you have a context, like we do here at York University, that enables this innovation and this ability to reach out to partnerships. They make it easy for me and for Steve and I to work together. How important that is. It's working, right? I do before and after skill development survey. It's a survey that comes out of Harvard University that, as students self-assess, they told me there will be no changes in, in other words, with those skills that students come in with and the interest they come in with at the beginning of the term is pretty much going to be the life skills that they've got. They were absolutely amazed that we had a difference in the first 3 months. May not change again and ever, but coming from high school, students are so impressionable. This is why we put all this energy into the first course at the Schulich School of Business, and this is why it's research-driven on all dimensions, not just technology, all dimensions, teamwork, delegating, all dimensions improved. I was shocked. I didn't expect it. All dimensions improved because once you start with one, from management and leadership theory, all the others developed as well. The other thing is, and you mentioned it, students are winning prizes. And the last thing is, this is the feedback I get from new students and parents coming in saying, yeah, hey, wow, we really love this new way. Of course, with all things good and bad, I hate technology, but when you see the reason for it and you get jobs like these young fellas, then there's all kinds of positives. So there we go. We wanted to leave a little bit, and I think, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes for questions?
2 minutes, certainly, Professor Adams. First of all, thank you very much for a great presentation.
Oh,
we
thanks.
appreciate it.